Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for today's webinar presentation entitled Preparing for the NJCAT Assessment, Tips to Ensure DDD Accuracy. Today's webinar is hosted by Caregivers of New Jersey, which is part of the Family Resource Network, or FRN for short. FRN is a network of nonprofit organizations that's been supporting individuals with disabilities and chronic health conditions, along with their families, since 1970. Through its affiliates, including Epilepsy Services of New Jersey, Autism Family Services of New Jersey, and Caregivers of New Jersey, FRN connects people to community-based services, education, and training. Annually, FRN supports over 3,500 individuals through direct support and 80,000 individuals through training and education throughout all 21 counties in New Jersey. So I'm excited to be able to share this presentation with you today about the NJCAT assessment, also known as the New Jersey Comprehensive Assessment Tool. And the key to this assessment is really understanding the types of questions that are going to be asked and how to answer these questions to ensure that your child's budget will truly be a reflection of the needs that they have. You know, time and time again, as support coordinators, we'll meet with families that are new to the DDD system, only to find that a lot of the times the NJCAT questions were not really answered accurately, and it does affect the budget that they have, which is used to be able to purchase the services and supports that the individual needs. So let's jump right in today and start talking about specifically what is this NJCAT. Well, the NJCAT is a standard assessment used to determine DDD eligibility. Now, there are different eligibility requirements that DDD has, but part of the overall process includes this NJCAT assessment. I do have another webinar presentation that talks about the overall step-by-step process to become eligible for DDD services. And at the end of today's webinar, you will have an email address where you can reach out and ask for a recording of that if you're interested in that. So I'm not going to go into all of those details today, but the NJCAT assessment is part of this eligibility process. And the assessment assesses an individual in three main areas, which are self-care, medical, and behavioral. So there's many questions that are asked that fall into each of these categories that's going to help determine whether this individual is going to be eligible for DDD. And then lastly, the assessment is really also a tool that's used by support coordinators to assist in writing the ISP and also help identify potentially needed services that this individual might need. Support coordinators will read through the NJCAT and add much of the information in it into the ISP. And this stands for the Individualized Service Plan. A support coordinator isn't just going to add the information itself, but they're also going to add a lot more specific details related to the support needs for that person. And you'll get a better idea of what I mean by this further on into our presentation, as well as what support coordinators actually are. So let's talk about when the NJCAT is typically completed. The assessment takes place during the initial DDD eligibility application process, which for most students, they will do the assessment in the fall or winter time of the student's last year of high school. Now, of course, not every individual is going to fall into this time frame. Typically parents will begin to apply and fill out the DDD application when their child turns 18. But now we are fast forwarding in this process as the student is nearing their 21st birthday. They're in their last year of high school. It's around the fall or winter of that year, and this is typically when they will do this assessment. Now, again, one thing to remember is that you can begin to apply for DDD when your child turns 18, but they cannot begin to receive any services until they turn 21. Now, it's also a good time to mention that an individual can request a reassessment when it's deemed appropriate, and I will go into that a little bit more later on in today's presentation. So now that we know what the NJCAT is and when it typically takes place, let's talk a little bit about who should be involved in the assessment, as well as who definitely will be involved in the assessment. So you are going to receive an email or a phone call from someone from the Developmental Disabilities Planning Institute, also known as DDPI. And this is out of Rutgers University. They are actually the ones who conduct the assessment for DDD. And typically the assessment is done over the phone or via Zoom these days. Now, the individual themselves should always be present and participate in the NJCAT to the amount that they are actually capable of doing. So we know that every individual's capabilities are different. We know that some individuals cannot speak, they're nonverbal, so they may not be able to participate. But if you have a child who really can give input for the assessment, they absolutely should to whatever their ability is. And lastly, you always want to have whoever knows the individual best be a part of this assessment. You don't want, a sibling that isn't in the day-to-day and they don't typically know the needs of your child, like you, the parent, guardian, the primary caregiver, whoever that may be, should be the ones participating in the NJCAT. So this assessment is going to be conducted, and within typically 2 to 4 weeks, you can expect to receive a letter in the mail with the results of the assessment. And unfortunately, what I have heard is you will not always know the tier letter that your child is assigned, which I'll get into, but the letter will basically tell you whether you are now deemed eligible for DDD services officially or not. But I want to talk a little bit about these results because the results are calculated and your child will get a score based on those 3 categories of self-care, which in this slide you see is labeled as an S, behavioral, which is a B, and medical, which is an M. And they will score a 1 to 5, rarely a 6, but it has been known to happen. And this score of 1 to 5 will be assigned per category. So the higher the number you see, the greater the need is in that category. And then this resulting score establishes the tier, which you see here on the slide as a T, which your child will be assigned. So a tier letter D individual, for example, has higher care needs and support needs than, let's just say, a tier A would have. Now, some individuals may be assigned something called the acuity differentiated factor, which is a modifier that is added to a tier letter, and it's signified by a lowercase letter a. And a tier A individual can have an acuity, a tier B can have an acuity, so on and so forth. And what this acuity does is it gives a boost in the budget for individuals that have clinical level of care need for behavioral and or medical. And so typically when you see a score of a 5, for example, a lot of the times an individual will be given the acuity for this. Now, the tier letter also is going to correspond to a budget that can be used to purchase services, and we'll go into that a little bit more in a moment. And the tier letter also corresponds to the rate that different service provider agencies will receive for providing services. So let's just say that someone is a tier B individual and they the day program. Well, that service provider, that day program agency, is going to get paid a standardized rate for a tier B individual. Now, let's just say that individual is a tier E. Obviously, they are going to have more support needs than a tier B. And so that day program agency will get paid more per hour because that individual will, require more care. And these are standardized rates that DDD provides for these agencies. All right, so I want to just quickly show you and give you an idea of the supports program waiver budget numbers. Now, typically speaking, someone that is brand new to DDD, coming out of high school, they're always going to be enrolled onto the supports program waiver. And I'll talk a little bit in a moment about the other waiver program that some individuals will eventually be enrolled in. You can see that a tier A individual, their total budget for the year is about $28,000 versus a tier E individual is going to receive a bit over $86,000. So again, the idea here, a tier A individual does not require as much as a tier E does. You'll also see the differences with someone that has an acuity, that lowercase letter A. They receive a bump in their budget because that person is going to require, let's say, a nurse or a behaviorist, someone that can be one-to-one on them due to behaviors. And so in order to be able to pay for those clinical care needs, they're going to receive a bump up in their budget for those things. You'll also see that the budget is also broken up into two columns here, employment day and individual supports. And I like to call these category buckets, okay? And this is a very confusing concept, not just for support coordinators, but even for families. But many families will always ask me, well, how do I know what service is going to come out of these different categories? And my answer is, well, your support coordinator really should be able to walk you through that. But I decided for this presentation to try to explain it a little bit. And I will say that with the caveat that you might be confused, but I'm going to do my best to help explain it. So let's just look at this employment day bucket. So the services that will always come out of this bucket are day habilitation. So that's like your day program. If your child goes to a day program, that the cost of that will always come out of this employment day bucket. Community inclusion will always come out of this employment day category. And all employment related services, so things like career planning, pre-vocational training, supported employment, so these are like your job coaches. All three of these services will always come out of this bucket. Now, community inclusion and employment related services, let's just say, you need more money than you have available in this employment day bucket. If there is money still available in this other side, this supports side, these two services can also come out of this bucket. DDD will allow you to use money from this supports bucket to help pay for employment related services and community inclusion. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Now let's look over at this supports bucket category. The services that you see listed in this area here can only come out of the supports category. So if you need assistive technology, cognitive rehabilitation, your therapies, natural supports training, respite, all of these services here can only come from this bucket category, this supports category. If you need more money for one of these services and you don't have enough in supports, you're going to have to wait. You cannot purchase it. Okay, DDD doesn't allow any of these services to come from this other employment day bucket. Now, there are some specific things that can be done for environmental modifications and vehicle modifications, but I'm not going to go into that for this presentation. Your support coordinator will be able to walk you through that. Okay, but just know the services that you see here can only come from this supports bucket category. However, the following other services are always going to come out of this supports bucket first. But let's just say you don't have enough money available, and you do have money available in the employment day side. DDD will allow money to come out of that category for these services. And these services are community-based supports. This is typically like the support that DSPs, direct support professionals, will provide to either support your child at home or in the community, or let's just say you have self-directed employees working for you. That typically is billed as community-based supports, transportation, behavioral supports, and goods and services. Goods and services, we typically will use community vendors for. So these are things like your gym memberships, classes, music lessons, art, therapeutic horseback riding. So all of these services are always going to first come out of this supports bucket. However, if you max out this category and you need more money, and there is money available on this employment day side, you can use funds from that category. All right, so I want to switch gears now and talk a little bit about the Community Care Program waiver, also known as the CCP for short. So this waiver program is not typically a waiver program DDD will put someone in upon graduating high school, unless there are specific situations that they deem it would be appropriate. There is a waiting list for the community care program. And so what I highly recommend families do is to put their child on the CCP waiting list, because it might take 5 to 7 years for your child to come up to that #1 spot, where then DDD will evaluate at that time and see whether it's appropriate to put your child on that community care program waiver. So in order to be enrolled on the waiver, they either need to be reached on the CCP waiting list, or be in some sort of emergency situation to where they might be facing homelessness due to the primary caregiver being incapacitated or possibly passing away. There are times when DDD will put someone on the CCP waiver for emergency situations, but it is not often. So typically speaking, they will be on this waiting list. Also, just because someone is put on the waiting list, it's not a guarantee of enrollment. Again, when they're reached on the waiting list, DDD will reach out to the family to discuss what the care needs are and whether it's appropriate at that time for them to be put on the CCP. Now, why? What is this CCP? Well, what you will notice is that individuals receive more money, and they are on this community care program waiver. So a tier A individual, for example, if I go back a slide here, a tier A individual on the supports program only gets $28,000 a year, versus someone on the community care program, they get $64,000 a year. So you'll see there's more money in the budget for people on the community care program. The other thing I want you to notice is that for this community care program waiver, there's this third bucket category. So remember, on the supports program, we only had employment day and supports buckets. However, on the community care program waiver, there is this third bucket category called individual supports. I think DDD might actually call it residential now. So the only service that can come out of this bucket category is what we call individual supports. And so individual supports can be billed at a daily rate as well as an hourly rate. And so just so everyone knows, if someone is going to live in a residential group home, they have to be on this waiver program. You cannot be on the supports program waiver and live in a group home setting. It's just not allowed. And this is because a group home will bill individual supports at a daily rate for the care that that person needs. Now, just because someone is put on this community care program waiver, it does not mean they have to live in a group home setting. So, you know, you can have a direct support professional that comes into the home or brings them out into the community and supports your child. Again, if you have self-directed employees, you know, they can get paid and you would bill individual supports also. If you are a parent or caregiver, now you can also receive compensation and be hired as an employee by different service provider agencies that are DDD approved, or you can use DDD's fiscal intermediary for that. Again, your support coordinator can help guide you through this process. But there is this additional category now available. A lot of the times as parents begin to age, they cannot provide the care that they used to be able to provide. And so this additional category allows for increased support needs for that child as parents age, or as the individual needs more support as well. And so again, this is very introductory. I know it can be very confusing, but I did just want to touch on this so that you can have an idea of what this budget looks like in both of these waiver programs. I do give a webinar presentation where I do give an overview of all of the different services available within DDD. You can reach out to us and ask for that link. But I did just want to show this slide that is a table of all of the different services you can use the budget for. So with that said, for the remainder of our presentation, I want to switch gears and actually take a look a bit at the NJCAT itself. So even though I have a link here where you can view an actual NJCAT sample, it would be blank. If you want the PDF to this presentation, you can reach out and the live link will be there. But honestly, you can do a Google search online and it will pop right up where you can view it there. So the very beginning of the NJCAT asks details in regards to the respondent, who is the person who's going to be answering the questions. It's then going to go on to begin to ask questions about the consumer, aka the individual who's applying for DDD services. It's just basic sort of demographic information that is put in there. It then is going to go on to ask some questions about sensory motor abilities. And if you look on the right, these answer choices will be either they're not able to do it, they need, or they can do it independently. So these are things like being able to roll from back to stomach, picking up objects, transferring objects from one hand to another. So these are some of those sensory motor questions. And then there's going to be some questions about cognitive abilities. So these are questions that have to do with whether they can tell time, whether they have a concept of time, their spatial, perceptual abilities, number awareness, shape awareness. And these are just questions that are going to be answered either yes or no. In the next section, there's going to be questions about how the person communicates, how they communicate expressively, their clarity of speech, whether they can speak in full sentences or just give, simple, single word answers, how others can understand their speech. So these again are either going to be yes or no questions. And then there's some questions in regards to social interaction. So for example, does the person prefer to spend time alone or in groups? Do they feel comfortable or uncomfortable when in a group? Do they make eye contact when they speak with people? And so on this slide here, you can see some examples, and the choices are given. And so the person given the assessment will basically tell you what the answer choices would be for those questions. The next section is all about self-direction. So this is, going to be talking about to what extent the person makes decisions about his or her everyday activities. So again, how the person spends time during the week, on weekends, how they spend their money, when to go out or leave the house. And typically now for the answer choices, it's going to be either that others decide on behalf of the individual, both the primary caregiver or respondent, they both decide, or just the individual themselves decide on their own. The next larger section of the NJCAT is all about self-care and independent living skills. And so these are questions related to basic self-care tasks such as eating, dressing, chewing and swallowing, toileting, washing hands, brushing or combing their hair, blowing their nose. And you'll see here that the answer choices available are either they have not done it, or they have had no opportunity or are not able to. They require hands-on assistance, or they require supervision, or they're independent. So independent means that they can start and finish a task without any help or prompting. One of the biggest issues I see is that parents, when they're doing this NJCAT, they don't really understand the difference between assistance and supervision. So I just want to go through that. Supervision means you either need to keep an eye on them and provide supervision so that they get it done, or maybe you have to provide step-by-step directions or verbal prompting or reminders. But with supervision, your hands are off. However, assistance means you are literally hands-on. You have to physically, maybe hand over hand, or do it completely for them. So physically dressing, if you just need to prompt your child, okay, now put your shirt on, okay, don't forget to do your zipper, this would be considered supervision. But if you have to physically help them put their arms through their sleeves, their head, through their shirt, physically help zipper their pants, this would be considered physical assistance. So it's really important to know the difference between supervision and assistance. There's also going to be questions in this section about daily living tasks, such as making their bed, cleaning their room, have they had opportunities to wash dishes or use a dishwasher, how they can do their laundry, fold and put their clothes away. So again, these are still all answered though, either has not done, assistance, supervision, or independent. So the remaining part of the NJCAT, there's going to be a section about behaviors. And this again is a larger section because it goes into a lot of detail in regards to aggression that might be towards themselves or aggression towards others. So, this would include things like hitting themselves, hitting others, kicking, pulling hair, biting, banging their head, eloping, wandering, getting up out of bed repeatedly for reasons other than just going to the bathroom, having tantrums, outbursts, maybe displaying repetitive behavior, different vocalizations or inappropriate, cursing. It's a very big section. It will also ask for sensory related questions, such as, you know, maybe aversions to textures, light, sounds. All of that is in the behavior section. Then there's a health section, which will go into any other diagnoses or health issues that your child might have. And everything is broken down into systems of the body. So circulatory issues, you know, whether they might have high cholesterol, high blood pressure. I'm drawing a blank at this particular moment, but respiratory issues, you know, maybe asthma, neurological issues, maybe like a seizure disorder. So everything is broken down into those types of health sections. School experience and employment. So this is just going to ask some historical details about the type of school they've gone to in the past, any employment or volunteering that they've done or been a part of. And then lastly, the caregiver's information, who is the primary caregiver. So hopefully this gives you a better idea of what types of questions you can anticipate. But during these last minutes, I really just want to discuss something really important and give you guys some tips. And that's really the importance of answering all of the questions accurately. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, I can't tell you how many times we've come across individuals who are brand new to DDD, and we as support coordinators are in the beginning stages of writing the ISP, trying to figure out what services the person might want or need. And as we're looking through the NJCAT, the support coordinator begins to see, man, a lot of these really weren't answered accurately. And so I've always thought to myself, well, why is this? Why aren't the questions being answered accurately? And here's some of the reasons why I think this occurs. So first, I think sometimes the parent doesn't actually understand the question. And so, you know, I think a lot of parents are nervous when they're doing this NJCAT, and they may not really understand what the person that's giving the assessment is really asking for. And so if you're ever in doubt, ask them to clarify. Every person that I have seen given NJCAT are some of the nicest people, and they are very patient. I mean, they have to be. They're doing these assessments day in, day out that are like an hour and a half. If you're not sure really what they mean or what they're really looking for in the question to be answered, just ask them to clarify. And I think that will help these answers being, these questions being answered more accurately. The other tip I can give you is you really, as the primary caregiver or the person that knows your child best, you want to make sure you're answering the questions as if you were not there. Okay, so if you're answering a question about physically dressing themselves, you need to think, hey, if I were not present, if I were not home, if I were not in the room, would Johnny be able to dress himself? So think about it that way. If you know that if you're not there, he is not going to be able to do it, whether it's because he wouldn't understand the steps or whether he physically couldn't do it, then you need to answer those questions in that regard. Okay, maybe if you weren't there, he really would need step-by-step directions, but maybe most days he can do it, but if you weren't there, he wouldn't be able to. Well, then answer the question that way, as if you were not there. The other thing you don't want to do is make your child seem more independent than they really are. Now, believe me, I know that we as parents, primary caregivers, we have been our kids' cheerleader. We have been that person in their life that has been there for them from day one, right? And so we typically want to sort of make them sound a bit more independent or better than they actually can do, because we don't want to sort of be embarrassed maybe to say, oh my goodness, I've been answering every question. No, they can't. No, they can't. No, they're not able to. No, they need assistance. Now is not the time to be embarrassed about answering no too many times. Now is not the time to make it seem like your child can do more than they actually can, because this leads to discrepancies. This leads to inaccuracies. And so remember, the results of this NJCAT are going to be directly related to their budget. So again, answer the questions to the most highest degree of accuracy than you can. The other last tip, answer as if your child was having their worst day, not their best day. And so if you know that maybe 60% of the time they can do something on their own, or maybe just need some verbal prompting, but then, well, maybe 30% of the time, 40% of the time, you know, they can't, they really need that help or they need that verbal prompting. Answer the question as if they need that support all the time. Don't answer it as if they're having their best day. The other thing I have noticed on some NJCATs that I have sat in on is parents want to give every single detail about something about their child. And I mean, I get we do this as parents. I'm a parent as well. But what I've seen happen is the parent will give an answer and then they start explaining away and giving a ton of details. And then what I've seen happen is that the person giving the assessment begins to sort of interpret what they're saying. And instead of, you know, answering the question as if physical assistance was needed, the more the parent explained, you know, they were sort of on the fence themselves, well, then the assessment giver will mark it as supervision. When in my mind, I was thinking, nope, this person needs the physical assistance. And because the parent said, well, usually they can do it, but sometimes it was then left to interpretation by the person giving the assessment. So what I would say is don't give a story for every answer that you give. Don't explain everything away. You have these tips now. You know how to answer. And so just give answers unless they ask you to sort of clarify a little bit. Don't feel like you need to support and explain every answer that you're giving. So I just want to touch now on NJCAT reassessments. You know, a lot of the times parents will ask, well, what if my child's needs change? Or, you know, what if from year to year we're just not having enough money in the budget? So I just want to briefly talk about reassessments. So typically, you know, you really want to try to have a reassessment done every 5 years. You don't have to, but you know, if you begin to find that there's a lot of inaccuracies in the NJCAT, I would encourage you, you know, look at that NJCAT every few years yourself. I know this is more work for you, but if you start seeing like, oh wow, you know what, this all says that he needs supervision, but he actually really needs a lot of physical assistance in all of these areas. If you start to see a real change in the support needs, then I would encourage you to request an NJCAT reassessment. So what I would encourage you to do is mark up all of the changes on the current NJCAT. And if you don't have the current one, your support coordinator will always have access to it, and you can ask them for it. Mark it up, fill out the NJCAT reassessment request form, and you'll send that right over to the email on the form. Email both of those to DDD. And really, reassessments should only be requested if they're truly needed, because honestly, you could get a lower tier. A reassessment could result in a lower tier. We don't see this often, but I have seen it happen. I've seen acuities taken away because the family requested a reassessment and it really truly wasn't needed. And so if you're ever unsure whether a reassessment is needed, you know, you can discuss that with your support coordinator or some of the others. You know, if your child attends a day program or does live in a group home, those people on your support team should be able to help guide you in those things as well. So what is your support coordinator's role? I've mentioned the support coordinator quite a bit in today's presentation, and support coordinators are DDD's case management people. And so they're going to be the ones that are going to connect you to the services that you need. They're going to be writing that ISP. However, when it comes to NJCATs, they're typically not going to be involved in reassessments, and they're definitely not going to be involved in that initial NJCAT as you are walking through DDD eligibility. And that's because at that point, you will not have even chosen a support coordination agency you want to work with yet. So there are times support coordinators may be asked to sit in on a reassessment, but it's not always typical. In the past, DDD has really discouraged support coordinators from being a part of NJCATs, but there are times if the individual of a primary caregiver or has very little support and they need help, support coordinators will be asked to sit in. So I hope that this presentation today has really helped you better understand the NJCAT, understand a little bit more about the budget and how it's broken down. You know, as always, we at Caregivers of New Jersey are here to help you. If you're looking for or will be looking for a support coordination agency, we would love the opportunity to serve you and your family. We were one of the original 3 support coordination agencies in the state, and we currently provide support coordination in the following counties that you see on this slide. Now, if you have specific questions and would like to speak with someone, please feel free to reach out to Allison Warwin on this page here. Her email is provided as well as our office phone number. We truly, truly enjoy and want to help you walk through this transition process into DDD. So if you have specific questions, we're here to help you. Thanks again so much for joining me today. Please take a moment to fill out the survey that's going to pop up on your screen as well. We truly value and need your feedback so that we know how we can better serve you in the future. Again, thanks so much for joining. Have a great day.